Sarah adjusted the strap of her utility belt, letting out a quiet sigh as she stepped onto the dusty expanse of the military training range. The morning sun stretched across the horizon in streaks of gold and amber, illuminating the endless rows of rifles, ammunition crates, and concrete bunkers. She had walked this range hundreds of times before, each step familiar, yet comforting. The air carried the faint metallic scent of gunpowder mixed with dust, a smell she had grown accustomed to over years of training. The hum of distant machinery, and the muted chatter of soldiers in the distance provided a rhythm to the otherwise still morning. Today, like most days, Sarah's duty was simple, at least on paper: clean and maintain the rifles that soldiers would later use for training. Exercises. She prided herself on her meticulous approach, knowing that even a single speck of dust left in a barrel could compromise performance. As she unpacked her cleaning kit, she carefully laid out brushes, oils, and cloths on a tarp beside her. Each tool had its place, each movement rehearsed countless times until it felt like second nature. To an outsider, it might have seemed mundane, almost monotonous, but to Sarah, it was an art, a quiet ritual that demanded focus and precision. She picked up the first rifle, a sleek, black assault weapon, and began the familiar process: disassembly. Brush through the barrel, wipe down each component, reassemble, inspect. Her movements were deliberate, almost meditative. Cleaning a weapon wasn't just about maintenance. It was about respect for the tool and the responsibility it represented. She had grown up around firearms, her father a retired veteran who had taught her the importance of discipline and attentiveness. For Sarah, this daily routine wasn't boring, it was grounding. As she worked, she allowed her mind to wander slightly, replaying memories of past missions and exercises. She thought about her early days in the military, the nervous excitement of her first live fire training, the adrenaline coursing through her veins as she fired rounds with precision. Over time, fear had been replaced with focus, hesitation replaced by instinct. Yet, despite her experience, she had never been on a frontline operation. Her duties were usually confined to support, logistics, and preparation. Today would, she assumed, be no different. Around her, the training range hummed with activity. Soldiers in camouflage uniforms moved between targets, checking scopes, and practicing drills. Their voices carried over the dry earth, a mixture of laughter, instructions, and casual conversation. The sound of rifles being loaded and unloaded punctuated the morning like a steady heartbeat. Sarah noticed the meticulous care others were taking with their weapons, some polishing, some adjusting sights, others simply inspecting. It was a choreographed dance of preparation, everyone contributing in their own way to a mission they knew might someday test them. Despite the familiarity, there was a subtle undercurrent of tension that Sarah could not ignore. It wasn't fear exactly, but an awareness that the calm of a training range was always temporary. The military had taught her to respect every moment, to understand that danger could strike anywhere, even in places deemed safe. She glanced across the range, observing the SEAL team assigned to oversee the exercise. They moved with quiet precision, their eyes scanning, muscles taut, bodies ready to react. Sarah admired their discipline, the way they seemed attuned to every nuance of the environment. They were calm, but she knew that calmness concealed razor-sharp instincts, honed by years of experience. Sarah set the first rifle down after a careful inspection, her hands wiping sweat from her brow. She picked up the next, repeating the process, each movement precise and controlled. Her mind drifted to the stories her father had told her about soldiers in combat, about the way ordinary tasks could suddenly become extraordinary under pressure. Cleaning rifles today felt routine, but she knew it was preparation for something larger, a foundation that could one day save lives. She moved with quiet confidence, unaware that those lessons were about to be tested in ways she could never have imagined. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the range. The warmth was comforting, yet it did little to mask the underlying tension in the air. Sarah's attention remained fixed on her work, the repetitive motions soothing in their predictability. She had developed a rhythm, a flow that allowed her to complete the task efficiently yet thoroughly. Brushes swirled inside barrels, oils gleamed on polished metal, and cloths left surfaces immaculate. Each rifle returned to its crate in perfect condition, ready for the next exercise or deployment. As she worked, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Despite the routine, she felt a sense of pride in her role. While others engaged directly in combat training, she was the silent guardian of readiness, ensuring that every soldier's most essential tool was in peak condition. She understood that even the smallest oversight could have dire consequences. Her attention to detail was not vanity, it was responsibility, a commitment to the safety and effectiveness of her unit. Time passed unnoticed. The rhythmic swish of cloths, the metallic scent of cleaning oil, and the occasional bark of commands from instructors blended into a seamless background. Sarah felt a rare serenity, a quiet satisfaction in the knowledge that she was prepared, meticulous, and focused. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine that the day would continue this way, predictable, controlled, safe. She did not yet know that this assumption was about to be shattered. Nearby, a young recruit fumbled with a rifle, his hands shaking as he struggled to disassemble it. Sarah noticed and walked over, crouching beside him. "Here, let me show you," she said, guiding his hands with gentle precision. She explained the steps slowly, demonstrating how to clean the barrel without scratching the metal, how to lubricate moving parts evenly, and how to inspect for damage. The recruit nodded, absorbing every word. Teaching, Sarah realized, was part of her own preparation as well. Sharing knowledge reinforced her own understanding and allowed her to contribute to the readiness of others. By mid-morning, the range had settled into a steady rhythm. Soldiers moved from target to target, rifles in hand, SEALs observing silently from strategic vantage points. Sarah continued her task, methodical and focused, unaware of the subtle shift in the air. A distant sound, almost imperceptible at first, brushed against her awareness. A faint rumble that didn't belong to the machinery, a vibration in the ground that seemed slightly off. She paused, brushing a hand across a rifle, and listened. For a fleeting moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. It was nothing, or so she thought. Sarah shook her head and returned to her work, dismissing the odd sensation as a trick of fatigue or the early morning stillness. The rifles lay in neat rows beside her, their polished metal gleaming in the sunlight. Soldiers chatted, instructors gave feedback, and the day continued its routine cadence. Sarah adjusted her grip on the next rifle, lost in the precision of her task. She hummed softly under her breath, the sound blending with the distant clatter of boots and muted conversation. And yet, beneath the surface, a tension lingered, subtle but insistent. The calm of the training range was fragile, a veneer over a reality that could shift in an instant. Sarah, absorbed in her meticulous work, did not notice the movement at the edge of her vision, a shadow, a fleeting flicker of motion that didn't belong. Nor did she anticipate that the ordinary, controlled world of cleaning rifles was about to explode into chaos, challenging everything she knew about routine, preparation, and courage. As she set down the last rifle, her mind briefly wandered to her evening plans. A call to her mother, a walk around the base, a quiet dinner alone. Simple thoughts grounded in safety. She smiled, feeling the satisfaction of a job well done. The morning had been productive, disciplined, and calm, a perfect example of routine. Sarah had no idea that in mere moments, her ordinary day would transform into a crucible of fear, adrenaline, and heroism that would test her in ways she had never imagined. The sun now hung high above, warm and unrelenting. Dust drifted lazily in the light, and the hum of activity continued uninterrupted. Sarah wiped her brow, taking a deep breath, savoring the brief serenity before the storm. She finished her rounds, placing the final cloth and cleaning kit back into her pack. Everything was in order, every rifle polished, every barrel checked. She felt accomplished, grounded, and ready. Yet, as the wind shifted across the range, carrying with it a faint but unmistakable tension, the calm of routine was about to be shattered forever. The morning's calm shattered in an instant. A sharp, high-pitched crack split the air, a sound so sudden and unnatural that it stole Sarah's breath. Her hand froze mid-motion, a cleaning cloth clutched tightly as her eyes darted toward the origin of the noise. Dust and gravel exploded a few hundred yards away, throwing up a cloud that glimmered in the sunlight. At first, she thought it was a training misfire, or perhaps a dropped weapon, but something in the pattern, the intensity, and the trajectory made her stomach twist with an unfamiliar tension. Soldiers nearby dropped to their knees, rifles snapping. Up as commands flew across the range. The hum of the morning transformed into chaos. Shouts, orders, and urgent movement blending into a cacophony that echoed off the concrete bunkers. Sarah's pulse spiked, each heartbeat thudding in her ears. Her mind raced as she tried to process what was happening. This was no exercise. The controlled environment of the training range, the ordered routines she had depended on, had been ripped away in a heartbeat. She ducked behind a stack of ammunition crates, her hands shaking as adrenaline surged. Her eyes scanned frantically, trying to identify the source of the attack. Shadows moved unnaturally fast at the edge of the range figures. She didn't recognize, carrying weapons and moving with precision. These weren't trainees or instructors. They were trained combatants, striking with deadly intent. A jolt of fear ran through her, gripping her chest with icy fingers. This was real. This was life or death. The SEAL team on the perimeter reacted. Instantly, their movements fluid and purposeful. Sarah watched, her breath caught in her throat, as they engaged the attackers with calm efficiency. Bullets tore through the air, and the sound of gunfire reverberated across the dusty expanse. She could feel the vibrations through the concrete and soil beneath her feet. The attackers were skilled, coordinated, and ruthless. Every instinct Sarah had honed over years screamed at her to run, to hide, to do anything to survive, but training reminded her that panic would be her enemy. "Stay low, find cover," a commanding voice barked nearby. Sarah crouched behind the crate, pressing herself against the cool metal. Her hands gripped the edge as she peeked over, trying to assess the rapidly changing battlefield. Smoke rose from a distant impact, mingling with dust and the acrid scent of gunfire. Soldiers scrambled, some returning fire, others securing positions. The normal routines of a training day had vanished completely, replaced by an overwhelming sense of urgency. For a moment, Sarah felt paralyzed, her mind racing yet frozen in indecision. She had cleaned rifles hundreds of times, practiced drills countless times, but nothing had prepared her for a live attack. Her heart pounded, her lungs worked furiously to draw air, and a cold sweat coated her back. Yet, amidst the fear, a small spark of resolve began to grow. Survival depended on focus, on clarity, on action. She had to act, not just for herself, but for the soldiers around her, who were depending on everyone to do their part. Her eyes found a rifle lying nearby, freshly cleaned and fully assembled. She hesitated, her fingers brushing the stock, feeling the weight and potential of the weapon. It had never been fired in combat before, but it was familiar in a way that brought a strange comfort. Sarah remembered her father's words. A weapon is only as effective as the person who wields it. Her father had taught her responsibility, discipline, and respect, but never how to face real enemy fire. That lesson, she realized now, would have to be learned in the moment. The attackers advanced with frightening speed, moving between cover, scanning for targets, and firing with deadly precision. Sarah's stomach tightened. She ducked lower, barely breathing, and assessed her surroundings. Concrete barriers, ammunition, crates, and observation towers offered imperfect cover. Every step she considered was measured against the deadly arcs of incoming bullets. Her mind raced, calculating risks and potential moves, but instinct was pushing her toward a single undeniable truth. She had to survive, and that meant using every tool and skill at her disposal. Suddenly, a figure moved rapidly toward her. It was one of the SEALs, sliding into position beside the crates. His calm presence was almost surreal amidst the chaos. Bullets zipped dangerously close, ricocheting off metal and dirt. Without hesitation, he assessed her position and spoke. With a firm, steady tone, "Grab that rifle, now." Sarah's hands shook violently as she reached for the weapon. The SEAL didn't wait for hesitation or fear. He trusted her to act, and his confidence was infectious. In that moment, she realized that survival wasn't about avoiding fear, it was about moving forward despite it. She clutched the rifle, feeling its weight, the cold metal against her hands, grounding her in the moment. Her mind raced, analyzing the situation. Enemy positions, potential escape routes, and allies nearby. Every detail mattered. The SEAL offered a quick, reassuring nod before moving to flank the attackers, his movements fluid and lethal. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she watched him, drawing strength from his confidence. She realized that the ordinary training she had performed that morning, the cleaning of rifles, the attention to detail, was suddenly invaluable. Every skill, every habit, every instinct mattered now. Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. Seconds dragged as bullets zipped past, yet the chaos unfolded in a blur. Sarah's hands, once only accustomed to cleaning weapons, were now gripping a tool of survival. She felt an unfamiliar connection to the rifle, a mix of fear, awe, and responsibility. Her pulse was a drumbeat in her ears, each thump reminding her that inaction could be fatal. She knew the attackers were calculating, precise, and relentless, and that hesitation on her part could cost lives. The ground shook from distant impacts, and the sound of gunfire became a symphony of chaos. Sarah ducked behind the crate, pressing herself into the metal, her fingers white from gripping the rifle. She could hear soldiers shouting commands, the SEALs coordinating movements, and the unmistakable bark of enemy orders. Amidst the noise, Sarah found a strange clarity. The world had narrowed to the range, the rifles, and the immediate threat. Everything else, the routine, the calm morning, the mundane cleaning tasks, was gone. A fleeting thought crossed her mind. Could this really be happening? She had always known that danger existed, that the military environment was inherently risky, but it had always been abstract, theoretical, confined to training scenarios and hypothetical missions. Now, the danger was real, immediate, and terrifying. Her entire life of preparation, training, and discipline coalesced into this single, crucial moment. Every calculation mattered, every second was precious, and every action could tip the balance between life and death. Then, the attackers made a sudden push, advancing closer to the central line of the range. Soldiers returned fire, but the enemy's precision and speed were alarming. Sarah felt her breath hitch, the rifle heavy in her hands, yet her grip was steadying. The SEAL had moved to intercept a flanking maneuver, shouting instructions that cut through the chaos. Sarah listened, absorbing every word, every cue, every command. Her mind, though racing, began to find order amidst the disorder. She realized that she was no longer a bystander. She was part of the fight. A piece of shrapnel kicked up dust. Near her feet, the explosion deafening, and she flinched instinctively. Yet, amidst the fear, a strange sense of focus emerged. Sarah raised the rifle slightly, sighting over the barrel, trying to gauge the distance and movement of the enemy. Her hands steadied, guided by years of precision work, by the countless hours she had spent cleaning, handling, and respecting these weapons. She felt a strange, almost ironic sense of preparation. The mundane task of cleaning rifles had unwittingly trained her for this precise moment. Around her, soldiers fought with determination, but the SEAL's presence remained. The calm center in the storm. He moved with lethal precision, covering angles, neutralizing threats, and guiding those around him. Sarah watched, learning, absorbing, and slowly finding courage she hadn't known she possessed. The enemy seemed relentless, but she understood that hesitation was far more dangerous than action. The rifle in her hands became an extension of her will, a tool not just of defense, but of empowerment. The first hour, or what felt like an eternity, was a blur of movement, sound, and adrenaline. Sarah ducked, crawled, and adjusted her position, keeping low while observing the battlefield. Every instinct honed during training kicked in. She noticed patterns in the attacker's movements, small tells that indicated their next move. Her mind, previously preoccupied with the calm routine of rifle maintenance, now operated at lightning speed, calculating angles, distances, and timing. She realized that survival required not just courage, but intellect, observation, and adaptability. As the attack continued, Sarah's fear gradually transformed into a determined focus. She was no longer merely cleaning rifles. She was defending herself, her comrades, and the range itself. Each movement, each decision, carried weight. Her ordinary morning had morphed into a crucible of danger, forcing her to act with precision, bravery, and ingenuity. The SEAL's boldness, the soldier's training, and her own unexpected courage converged in a single, harrowing reality. She had become part of a fight she had never imagined facing, yet she was ready to rise to the occasion. The world had narrowed to a tunnel of chaos for Sarah. Dust hung thick in the air, mingling with the acrid stench of gunfire and gunpowder. Her ears rang from the sharp cracks of rifles, the distant explosions, and the shouted commands that ricocheted across the range. The training she had relied on for years, the cleaning routines, safety drills, and precise handling of weapons, now collided with raw fear, thrusting her into an environment she had never experienced before. Her heart hammered in her chest, every beat demanding focus she didn't feel she had. Instinct pulled her lower behind the concrete barrier she had chosen for cover. Her hands gripped the rifle, palms sweating, knuckles white as she pressed her forehead against the stock. The weight of it grounded her slightly, even as her mind raced to make sense of the unfolding attack. Soldiers she had trained alongside for months darted around her, some returning fire, others screaming orders, their eyes wide with adrenaline-fueled clarity. The SEAL team moved with an almost unnatural calm, scanning, assessing, and striking with lethal precision. One glance at them reminded her that experience was a weapon as potent as any rifle. A sudden movement caught her eye, a shadow flitting across the dust, faster than she expected, taking cover behind an overturned crate. Her stomach lurched. This was no training exercise. Every instinct screamed at her. The attackers were skilled, they were coordinated, and they were close. She felt a jolt of panic, but forced herself to breathe, counting in her head to calm the tremors coursing through her body. Training and fear clashed inside her, a strange war between instinctual survival and disciplined focus. She knew she had seconds to act, but in those seconds, her mind needed precision. Sarah's gaze shifted to the SEAL who had handed her the rifle earlier. He was moving with fluidity, assessing positions, checking angles, his movements precise and unhesitating. The contrast between his calmness and the chaos surrounding him was stark, almost surreal. She realized in that instant that she could survive this, not because the situation was safe, but because he had made her see that action, not fear, was her ally. His confidence, unshakable and immediate, became a lifeline for her. She wasn't alone. He had chosen to trust her with this responsibility, and that trust demanded that she rise to the challenge. A volley of gunfire erupted nearby, forcing Sarah to duck even lower. Bullets whizzed perilously close, pinging off metal and stone. She pressed herself against the barrier, her breath shallow, listening to the rhythm of combat around her. Every sound told a story: the crack of a rifle, the subtle shuffle of feet across gravel, the occasional grunt or shout. She began to recognize patterns, the ebb and flow of enemy movements, the way soldiers adjusted their positions strategically. It was overwhelming, but within the chaos, she found a thread of order. Observation became survival. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the rifle, raising it just enough to peer over the barrier. The enemy had advanced slightly, using the dust and debris as cover, their movements coordinated and purposeful. She swallowed hard, her throat dry, and tried to steady her racing heart. The rifle felt heavier now, charged with responsibility she hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a tool of survival, and in her hands, it symbolized her willingness to step beyond the routine she had always relied on. Fear lingered, but determination was beginning to take root. The SEAL glanced at her briefly, nodding in acknowledgement before moving toward a nearby barricade to intercept a flanking attack. His silent communication carried reassurance. Focus, observe, act. Sarah mimicked his stance, raising the rifle cautiously and aiming at the enemy's general direction, aware that she had no time for hesitation. Every second mattered. Her pulse pounded, yet she forced her breathing into a controlled rhythm, the way instructors had drilled into her during countless exercises. Instincts she didn't know she had honed began to guide her actions. A loud explosion erupted from the far end of the range, sending a plume of dirt and smoke into the air. Sarah flinched, ducking instinctively, but this time she pushed herself to act. She assessed the enemy's movement, tracking a figure moving into an open position. She remembered the fundamentals: align your sights, control your breathing, anticipate motion. Her finger hovered over the trigger, trembling slightly, but her mind was unnervingly clear. This was the first time she had felt the rifle not as a tool to clean, but as an extension of herself. The figure moved again, and Sarah took her shot. The sound of the rifle firing echoed through the range, loud and jarring, but the effect was immediate. The attacker faltered, giving her and nearby soldiers a momentary advantage. Her heart skipped at the realization that she had acted, and that action had mattered. A wave of adrenaline surged through her, sharpening her focus rather than clouding it. For the first time in her life, the weapon in her hands felt like a conduit of control amid chaos, a means to protect herself and others. Time slowed as she reloaded, her hands steadying, every movement deliberate. The SEAL's voice cut through the haze, offering quick guidance. Move left. Cover that angle. Watch your perimeter. She obeyed instinctively, sliding behind a low wall, scanning for threats. Her perception of the battlefield expanded, every detail now crucial. A shadow, a movement, the glint of sunlight on a barrel. Each observation informed her next action. Fear was present, but it was tempered by clarity, the acute awareness that focus could mean survival. The sounds of combat became a strange rhythm. Sarah noticed patterns in the attacker's movements, learning to anticipate their actions with uncanny precision. Every step she took, every adjustment, was calculated. Her mind worked at a speed that amazed her, tracking distances, judging trajectories, monitoring the SEAL's maneuvers, and staying aware of allies' positions. Her training in weapon handling, attention to detail, and patience in her cleaning routines suddenly had a profound purpose. Each habit, once mundane, was now a lifeline. A flanking attacker emerged from behind a pile of debris, aiming toward the SEAL. Sarah's instincts screamed at her. She raised the rifle with trembling precision, calculated the distance, and fired. The attacker dropped back behind cover. Her chest heaved with relief, but there was no time to celebrate. A battle was far from over. Her mind, racing yet methodical, absorbed every lesson the environment offered. She realized that she was no longer a bystander. She had become an active participant in a fight where every decision carried weight. The SEAL moved beside her briefly, assessing the battlefield, his eyes scanning for new threats. "Stay sharp. Watch your angles," he instructed. Sarah nodded, gripping the rifle tighter. She felt a sense of connection and shared purpose, an unspoken acknowledgement that she was part of something larger than herself. Fear remained, a constant companion, but it no longer dictated her actions. She had found a balance, awareness of danger tempered by deliberate, decisive movement. Every shot, every movement, every breath mattered. Sarah's perception sharpened, the chaos of the attack condensing into a series of calculations and instincts. Dust swirled around her, bullets whizzed past, and soldiers engaged enemies with coordinated precision. She observed patterns in the attacker's strategies, predicting their moves and adjusting her position accordingly. Her mind, once preoccupied with cleaning rifles, now navigated the complexities of real-time combat with clarity and adaptability. Each moment was a lesson, each action a test of courage. Despite the chaos, Sarah found a rhythm in her movements. She ducked, slid, and aimed with growing confidence, relying on training, observation, and instinct. The SEAL team continued to coordinate the defense, providing cover and guidance. Every nod, every glance, every shouted instruction was a lifeline. Sarah's understanding of the battlefield deepened. She realized that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was action despite it. Each calculated step, each careful shot, was proof of her emerging resilience. As the battle raged on, Sarah's fear gradually transformed into focused determination. The rifle in her hands was no longer just a tool. It had become an extension of herself. She was part of the fight, contributing in a tangible, meaningful way. The SEAL's trust, combined with her own growing confidence, allowed her to act decisively, even as bullets tore through the air around her. For the first time, she felt the strange exhilaration of participating directly in life or death combat. Hours or what felt like hours passed in a blur of movement, gunfire, and instinct. Sarah's mind sharpened with every second, every shot, every command. The attackers, though skilled, were met with a coordinated and relentless defense. She was no longer the person who had started the morning cleaning rifles. She was a soldier, a participant, a defender. The SEAL's presence, the discipline of her training, and the necessity of survival coalesced, transforming her into someone capable of extraordinary action under unimaginable pressure. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the immediate wave of enemy pressure shifted. A lull in the assault gave Sarah a fleeting moment to catch her breath, to assess, to absorb the enormity of what had occurred. She lowered the rifle slightly, feeling its weight, the connection it symbolized, and the responsibility it carried. Around her, the battlefield was still active, but the rhythm of attack had changed. She had survived the initial onslaught, not by luck, but by focus, courage, and trust. The chaos of the attack seemed to reach a crescendo. Bullets whizzed past Sarah, ricocheting off metal crates and concrete barriers, sending up clouds of dust and debris. Her ears rang, her heart pounded, and adrenaline surged through her veins, impulses that made her skin tingle. Every instinct screamed for her to stay low, stay hidden, to survive, but the SEAL's presence beside her offered something she hadn't yet experienced. A path through the chaos, a way to act instead of merely reacting. He was calm, unwavering, a fixed point in the storm of violence. Without breaking his rhythm, he scanned the battlefield. His eyes moved like a predator's, catching every movement, calculating every threat. He assessed her position, the weight of the rifle in her hands, the shaking of her fingers, and the instinctive hesitation that fear brought. Then, in a single fluid motion, he slid beside her, crouched, and spoke with a voice that was both commanding and reassuring. "Take my rifle. Now we need every hand." His tone left no room for doubt or debate. Survival demanded action, and he was offering her a weapon and the trust to wield it. Sarah froze. The rifle he held out was a high-powered sniper rifle, a weapon she had only seen in passing, handled by expert marksmen. Its long barrel gleamed in the sunlight, its stock polished and deadly precise. Her eyes widened, and for a heartbeat, her mind screamed. She wasn't a sniper. She had never been trained to fire a weapon like this in live combat. Her hands trembled uncontrollably as she reached for it, hesitating for just a moment too long. The SEAL's gaze locked onto hers, calm, but insistent, and she realized that hesitation was a luxury she could not afford. The rifle felt impossibly heavy in her hands, the weight of responsibility crashing down on her. She gripped it tightly, feeling the cold metal bite against her palms. The scope was precise, almost intimidating, and her fingers hovered over the trigger. The SEAL nodded briefly, silently conveying that he believed in her, that she could do this. Trust, she realized, was as powerful a weapon as the rifle itself. The enemy had forced her out of the controlled routine of cleaning weapons and thrust her into the heart of a life-or-death scenario. Now, the decision to act or freeze was hers alone. A sudden flurry of movement drew her attention to the far end of the range. An enemy combatant had emerged from behind cover, moving with the stealth and precision of someone trained in ambush. Sarah's breath caught in her throat, her heart hammering against her rib cage. Her hands shook, but she forced herself to raise the rifle, peering through the scope for the first time under combat conditions. Her finger hovered over the trigger, each millisecond stretching into an eternity. The SEAL watched her intently, giving her silent support, ready to intervene if she faltered. "Breathe, focus, wait for the moment," he whispered, a single breath cutting through the noise of gunfire, explosions, and shouts. Sarah obeyed, her lungs drawing in a slow, steady rhythm, her mind narrowing down to the target before her. The enemy moved again, a subtle shift in posture, an almost imperceptible flicker of motion. Sarah adjusted her aim, aligning the crosshairs with precision, every muscle in her body tense with anticipation. This was no longer a training exercise. Every decision carried weight, every second mattered. The world seemed to slow as she took the shot. The rifle bucked slightly against her shoulder, a recoil she barely felt, and the enemy faltered, collapsing behind cover. Relief surged through her, immediate and overwhelming, but there was no time to dwell on success. The SEAL moved, with rapid precision, covering angles and neutralizing threats with deadly efficiency. He repositioned, signaling silently for her to maintain focus on the next target. Sarah's hands tightened around the rifle. She had never imagined she could wield such a weapon with this level of impact, but now she understood its deadly potential. The attack was relentless, the enemy constantly testing defenses, probing for weakness. Sarah adjusted her stance, moving with careful, deliberate steps, using crates and concrete barriers for cover. She began to notice patterns in the attacker's movements, predicting when and where they would emerge next. Every instinct honed from years of handling rifles, cleaning barrels, and paying attention to detail became crucial in guiding her actions. She was no longer just surviving. She was participating, influencing the outcome, and feeling the empowerment that came with taking control. Time passed in a blur. Each enemy movement required split-second decisions. When to fire, when to hold, when to duck, when to move. The SEAL remained a constant presence beside her, providing silent guidance and coverage. His confidence was contagious. Sarah began to mirror his calm focus, moving deliberately despite the chaos, trusting her training and her instincts. She could hear her own breathing, controlled and steady over the distant gunfire. Every shot she took was measured, deliberate, and increasingly effective. The SEAL's boldness extended beyond merely handing her the rifle. He positioned her strategically, ensuring she had the best line of sight while minimizing exposure. He whispered adjustments, angles slightly left. Wait for the shadow to move. Sarah obeyed, noting the subtle shifts in the battlefield, and gradually, the terror that had gripped her in the first moments of the attack began to transform into focus, purpose, and even a sense of confidence. The rifle, once alien and intimidating, became an extension of her resolve. She fired again, each shot precise, guided by observation, instinct, and the fleeting confidence that grew within her. Enemy combatants faltered, retreating behind cover, or falling under the disciplined fire of the SEAL team. Sarah felt the rush of adrenaline intertwined with a strange, almost surreal clarity. She was acting in concert with the SEAL, part of a coordinated effort, contributing meaningfully to the defense. Every movement mattered. Every action was weighted with consequence. The environment around her was chaos incarnate. Smoke, dust, and debris clouded visibility. Shouts and explosions blended into a deafening symphony of warfare. Yet amidst this, Sarah felt a sense of order take root in her mind. Observation, calculation, and controlled action became her guiding principles. She learned to anticipate enemy movements, adjusting her aim, position, and timing. The rifle was no longer just a weapon handed to her. It was a lifeline, a conduit for her courage, and a symbol of her ability to rise to the moment. A sudden movement to her left caught her attention, an attacker attempting to flank the SEAL's position. Without hesitation, Sarah adjusted her aim, accounting for distance and trajectory, and fired. The attacker faltered, granting the SEAL the opportunity to secure his flank. A surge of adrenaline and disbelief ran through her. She had just protected someone with whom she had shared this moment of trust. Fear still lurked in the background, but it had been tempered by purpose, training, and sheer necessity. The SEAL glanced at her, a brief nod of acknowledgement passing between them. That nod said more than words could convey. He trusted her. She had risen to the occasion, and together they were influencing the tide of the battle. Sarah felt a strange sense of pride, not of arrogance, but of realization. She was capable of courage she had never imagined. The ordinary, controlled tasks of cleaning and maintaining rifles had inadvertently prepared her for this exact crucible. Every skill, every habit, every precise movement mattered. The attackers pressed forward, relentless but increasingly cautious. Sarah maintained her composure, adjusting positions, taking careful shots, and coordinating silently with the SEAL. Her breathing, once frantic, had settled into a controlled rhythm. Her movements were deliberate, fluid, and increasingly confident. The rifle, heavy and precise, felt like an extension of her focus, and each action she took was guided by a combination of instinct, observation, and the SEAL's silent mentorship. As the engagement continued, Sarah began to notice subtle shifts in the enemy's tactics, learning to anticipate their strategy. She moved with intention, covering vulnerable angles and providing support where needed. Every shot she fired was measured, calculated, and effective. She was no longer a passive participant. She was an active defender, a force influencing the scene. Battle. Her fear had not disappeared, but it had been transformed into clarity and focus. Minutes, hours, it was impossible to tell passed in a blur of adrenaline and action. Sarah's hands, once trembling with uncertainty, were now steady. Her mind, once consumed with panic, was sharp and precise. She had risen to the moment, guided by the SEAL's trust and her own growing confidence. The battle continued, but Sarah had changed. She was no longer simply cleaning rifles. She was wielding one, commanding respect, and actively shaping the course of events around her. And then, for a brief moment, the SEAL stepped back, allowing Sarah to take the lead on observing enemy movement. She raised the rifle, adjusted the scope, and fired with precision. Another attacker went down, and for the first time, Sarah realized the full weight of her actions. She had taken responsibility, faced fear, and acted decisively. The SEAL's bold move handing her the sniper rifle had forced her into a crucible of courage, and she had emerged capable, alert, and empowered. The battlefield had become a blur of motion, dust, smoke, and gunfire. Every sense was heightened for Sarah. The acrid scent of gunpowder filled her nostrils. The echo of rifle shots ricocheted in her skull, and the distant shouts of soldiers and enemies alike mingled in a chaotic symphony. Her hands were steady now on the sniper rifle, but her mind raced furiously, processing threats, calculating distances, and anticipating enemy movements. Each second felt like an eternity. Every moment was a life-or-death decision, and hesitation could be fatal. The SEAL moved alongside her with practiced precision, scanning angles, neutralizing threats, and signaling silently for her to focus on key targets. His calmness contrasted starkly with the chaos around them, anchoring Sarah even as her pulse hammered in her ears. The rifle in her hands had become more than a weapon. It was an extension of her focus, a tool that demanded every ounce of her attention. She realized that fear was no longer her master. It was her guide, sharpening her senses and forcing her to act decisively. An enemy figure darted across the dusty field, taking advantage of debris for cover. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she tracked him through the scope. The SEAL whispered, "Steady. Wait for the opening." Her finger hovered over the trigger, trembling slightly, but her mind was clear. She visualized the shot, accounted for distance and movement, and exhaled slowly before squeezing the trigger. The shock rang out, precise and controlled. The enemy faltered, dropping behind cover, giving her a fleeting sense of power and terrifying responsibility. Sarah's adrenaline surged, but she forced herself to remain calm. Her eyes swept the battlefield, noting patterns in the attackers' movements, the timing of their assaults, and the openings for counteraction. She was learning, in real time, adapting to an environment that had shifted from routine to life-threatening chaos in a heartbeat. Each decision, each adjustment of her position was critical. She crouched behind cover, pivoted, and raised the rifle again, prepared to act in an instant. The enemy pressed forward relentlessly. They were skilled, calculated, and terrifyingly relentless. Bullets tore through the air, kicking up clouds of dust and ricocheting off metal crates. Sarah's ears rang, her muscles tensed, but she found an odd rhythm amidst the chaos. Observation, anticipation, and timing became her weapons alongside the rifle. The SEAL's presence continued to guide her. He moved with fluid precision, covering her blind spots, providing silent cues, and maintaining a calm center amid the storm. Her first few shots had given her a surge of confidence, but the battle was far from over. She had to remain vigilant, moving constantly, scanning for new threats, and coordinating silently with the SEAL and nearby soldiers. Each movement was calculated, sliding behind crates, ducking low, adjusting her stance, and raising the rifle only when she had a clear shot. The rifle felt alive in her hands, responsive and precise. She had gone from trembling fear to controlled determination, and the change was empowering. The dust and smoke swirled around her, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow. Sarah noticed subtle movements at the edges of her vision figures, flanking, crouching, advancing. Each required rapid assessment and split-second action. Her training, while mostly mundane routines of rifle cleaning and preparation, suddenly became invaluable. Muscle memory guided her hands, discipline steadied her aim, and focus sharpened her awareness. She realized that even in moments of terror, preparation mattered. Every small habit had a purpose now. The SEAL moved to intercept a new wave of attackers, attempting a coordinated push. He glanced at Sarah, signaling with a subtle gesture to hold her line. She nodded, adjusting her aim and focusing on a target moving across an exposed path. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, yet she felt an eerie clarity. The rifle was steady in her hands, her breathing controlled, and her mind laser-focused. Each shot counted. Each decision could tip the balance of life and death. A sudden shout erupted nearby. A soldier had been pinned down by enemy fire. Sarah's instincts screamed at her to move, to cover, to act. The SEAL's presence reminded her of her role: observe, anticipate, and act with precision. She adjusted her scope, lining up the next target, feeling a strange mixture of fear and determination. Her fingers squeezed the trigger, the rifle bucking against her shoulder as the enemy faltered. Relief and adrenaline mingled in her veins. She was making a difference. She was no longer merely surviving. She was contributing. The battle escalated further. Dust clouds obscured visibility, and the sun reflected off metal and debris, creating a disorienting haze. Sarah ducked behind a stack of crates, adjusting her position, scanning for threats. Every second demanded rapid analysis and immediate response. Her heart raced, but fear no longer dominated her. It had been tempered by focus and experience gained in mere minutes of combat. The SEAL moved beside her, providing cover and silent guidance. Together, they formed a rhythm, a deadly dance of strategy, observation, and firepower. Her hands were steady now, the rifle an extension of her determination. She tracked enemy movement, anticipating advances and flanking maneuvers. Each shot she took was precise, calculated, and effective. The SEAL occasionally whispered instructions. Shift left, angle slightly, hold. Each directive was absorbed instantly, guiding her actions in real time. She marveled at the way his calm presence allowed her to act decisively, even amidst chaos. The battlefield was a living puzzle, and she was learning to solve it piece by piece. The SEAL moved briefly to cover another angle, leaving Sarah responsible for a critical line of sight. Her pulse surged, but clarity dominated her fear. She watched an enemy combatant emerge from behind a barrier, and in one fluid motion, she raised the rifle, tracked the target, and fired. The shot hit true. Another enemy fell back. Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline, confidence, and disbelief. She had just acted decisively, under fire, with a weapon she had never imagined using in such circumstances. Minutes stretched into an eternity. As the attack continued, dust, smoke, and gunfire created an overwhelming sensory overload, yet Sarah's mind remained focused. Observation, prediction, and precision guided her movements. The rifle felt lighter now, an extension of herself rather than an alien object. She moved with purpose, adjusting positions, taking careful shots, and coordinating silently with the SEAL. Each decision was crucial. Hesitation could cost lives. Fear was present, but it had become a tool rather than a hindrance. A sudden explosion erupted nearby, kicking up a cloud of dust and debris. Sarah ducked instinctively, but kept the rifle ready. Through the haze, she spotted a figure attempting to flank the SEAL's position. Without hesitation, she aimed, tracked, and fired. The enemy faltered, retreating behind cover. Relief surged through her, but there was no time to dwell. Every moment demanded vigilance. She had learned to trust her instincts, her training, and the SEAL's guidance. She was now an integral part of the defense, not merely an observer. The SEAL returned, repositioning beside her. He nodded once, a subtle but powerful acknowledgement of her performance. Sarah felt a strange mixture of pride and disbelief. She had faced fear, acted decisively, and made a tangible impact on the battlefield. The rifle, heavy and precise, had become an instrument of her courage and focus. She realized that ordinary routines, cleaning rifles, maintaining discipline, and paying attention to detail had prepared her for this extraordinary moment. The attackers pressed forward with renewed aggression. Sarah adjusted her stance, sliding behind cover, scanning, and taking aim. Each shot was deliberate, each movement calculated. The battlefield seemed to bend to her awareness. She tracked the enemy's positions, anticipating their next moves. Fear remained, but it was now tempered by purpose, clarity, and skill. She was no longer the nervous recruit who had hesitated earlier. She had become an active participant, a defender, and a soldier capable of decisive action. Hours seemed to compress into minutes. Sarah's mind worked in overdrive, analyzing threats, adjusting her aim, and coordinating with the SEAL. Her hands were steady, her breathing controlled, and her focus razor-sharp. The rifle had become an extension of her resolve, each shot a testament to her growing courage and adaptability. She had transformed fear into action, chaos into calculated response, and uncertainty into decisive engagement. As the immediate threat persisted, Sarah began to notice the effects of her actions. Enemy movements slowed, coordination faltered, and the SEAL team gained small advantages. Her shots, guided by observation and instinct, were helping shift the balance of the battle. A sense of empowerment, mixed with exhaustion, flowed through her. She had taken control of her fear, embraced responsibility, and contributed meaningfully to the defense. The ordinary morning of cleaning rifles had become a crucible of courage, and she was thriving under pressure. For the first time, she realized the magnitude of what she had done. She was not merely following orders. She was making critical decisions under fire, protecting her comrades, and actively shaping the outcome of the attack. Her hands, once trembling, were steady. Her mind, once clouded with fear, was sharp and precise. She had faced the unimaginable, risen to the challenge, and discovered strength she hadn't known existed. The battlefield, chaotic and lethal, had become a proving ground. She had passed. The sun climbed higher, casting harsh light over the dusty range, illuminating the chaos in unforgiving detail. Sarah crouched behind the concrete barrier, rifle in hand, sweat dripping from her brow. The smell of gunpowder and dust filled her nostrils, mixing with the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Her heart pounded, but it no longer dictated her actions. Each movement, each breath, each calculation had become deliberate. She was no longer simply reacting, she was anticipating, controlling, and influencing the battle. The SEAL moved beside her with fluid precision, his eyes scanning the battlefield for threats. He was a constant anchor in the storm of bullets, explosions, and dust, signaling silently when to move, when to fire, and when to hold. Sarah mirrored his actions, raising the rifle, observing the enemy, and taking careful aim. The first wave of terror had passed, but the enemy regrouped quickly, demonstrating coordination and cunning. Every second was a test of focus, every shot a critical decision. Sarah's confidence had grown with every successful shot. The rifle, once foreign and intimidating, felt like an extension of herself. She adjusted her stance, breathing deliberately, and tracked the next enemy movement. The seal whispered guidance. Hold, wait, now. She exhaled slowly, squeezed the trigger, and felt the rifle recoil against her shoulder. The enemy fell behind cover. A surge of adrenaline and relief coursed through her, but there was no time to dwell. The battle demanded relentless focus. The attackers pressed forward, attempting to exploit weak points. Sarah observed their patterns, the timing, the angles, the coordination. Her mind worked at lightning speed, calculating trajectories, predicting movement, and identifying vulnerabilities. Each decision she made was informed by observation, instinct, and training. She adjusted her aim, fired, and watched as another enemy faltered. The seal glanced at her, nodding slightly. Trust had become mutual. She had risen from fear to competence, from hesitation to decisive action. Dust swirled violently around her, kicked up by explosions and ricocheting bullets. Sarah slid behind a low barricade, her rifle ready, eyes scanning for threats. She noticed a group of enemies attempting a flanking maneuver. Her pulse quickened, but focus dominated fear. She raised the rifle, aligning the crosshairs with precision. The seal covered the opposite flank, providing silent support. The coordination between them, though unspoken, was seamless. Sarah's confidence grew with each shot, each decision, each enemy neutralized. Her hands, once trembling uncontrollably, were steady now. Her breathing was deliberate, controlled, and rhythmic. Each shot she took was calculated, deliberate, and effective. The rifle felt like a natural extension of her body, guiding her focus, concentration, and courage. She was learning to predict enemy movements, anticipate attacks, and act decisively. The battlefield, once overwhelming, had become a space she could navigate with growing confidence. Fear was still present, but it had been transformed into clarity and purpose. The seal moved closer, signaling a crucial opportunity. You see the enemy near the ridge? Take the shot when ready. I'll cover the next approach. Sarah adjusted her scope, assessing distance, angle, and wind. Her fingers tightened on the trigger, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She exhaled, squeezed, and the rifle bucked against her shoulder. The enemy stumbled back behind cover. She felt a strange, empowering mix of relief and adrenaline. Her actions were making a tangible difference in the outcome of the battle. The attackers pressed on, adapting to the resistance. They were relentless, but Sarah's observation, skill, and growing confidence allowed her to act preemptively. She tracked movements, calculated trajectories, and anticipated advances. The rifle, once intimidating, was now a conduit of power and focus. The SEAL's presence beside her provided reassurance and tactical guidance, enabling her to act decisively. She had moved from fear to mastery, from hesitation to lethal precision. A sudden explosion erupted nearby, throwing dirt and debris into the air. Sarah ducked instinctively, heart hammering, but immediately recalibrated. She scanned for movement, identifying a shadow advancing along the ridge. She raised the rifle, adjusting for distance and wind, and squeezed the trigger. The enemy faltered, retreating behind cover. Relief surged through her, tempered by the realization that vigilance must remain constant. Every second, every shot, every movement mattered. The seal moved beside her, whispering advice. Angle slightly. Wait for the shift now. Sarah obeyed, lining up the next shot, and fired with precision. Another enemy dropped back. A strange exhilaration coursed through her veins. She was actively influencing the tide of battle, contributing in ways she had never imagined. Fear remained, but it had transformed into acute focus, clarity, and a sense of purpose. She was no longer a passive participant. She was an integral force. In the defense, the battlefield had shifted subtly. The attackers' coordinated advance slowed, their confidence waning under the relentless fire from the SEAL team and Sarah's newly honed marksmanship. Dust and smoke created a chaotic haze, but through it, Sarah's perception sharpened. She moved with careful deliberation, adjusting her stance, scanning and firing with precision. The rifle had become part of her, an extension of her focus, courage, and skill. Each shot reinforced her growing confidence. The SEAL nodded toward a distant position. Enemy moving near the eastern barricade, cover me. Sarah took aim, tracking the movement, and fired. The shot landed, forcing the enemy back. The SEAL moved to intercept another threat, relying on her continued vigilance. They had become a coordinated unit, a seamless partnership born out of necessity, trust, and shared purpose. Sarah felt a surge of pride, mixed with disbelief. She had stepped into a role she never imagined for herself and was excelling under. Extreme pressure. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Each movement, each decision, each shot was critical. Sarah maintained focus, scanning the battlefield for threats, calculating angles, and anticipating advances. She had learned to use fear as a guide, a tool that sharpened her senses and forced her to act decisively. The rifle in her hands was no longer foreign. It was a natural extension of her focus, courage, and determination. The SEAL moved briefly to provide cover for another sector, leaving Sarah responsible for monitoring a vulnerable approach. Her pulse surged, but clarity dominated fear. She observed the enemy's movements, adjusted her aim, and fired with precision. Another attacker faltered, forced to retreat. Sarah's confidence swelled. She had become a key player in the defense, a soldier capable of decisive action under extreme pressure. The battlefield had begun to change. The attackers' coordination faltered under the relentless fire, and small tactical advantages began to emerge. Sarah's observation, focus, and skill had shifted the balance subtly, but significantly. Each shot she fired was a contribution to survival, to control, to victory. Fear remained, but it had been transformed into clarity, purpose, and resilience. The SEAL moved back toward her, nodding with approval. You've got this. Keep your focus, cover the angles, and watch for movement. Sarah adjusted her stance, scanning for threats, her hands steady, her breathing controlled. She was no longer the frightened soldier who had hesitated at the start. She had become an active, decisive participant in a deadly struggle. Her actions mattered. Her courage mattered. Her training, once routine, had become her lifeline. As the attackers regrouped for another push, Sarah and the SEAL prepared to counter. Dust swirled, smoke obscured vision, and the battlefield remained chaotic, but Sarah had found a rhythm. Observation, anticipation, and precise action guided her movements. She raised the rifle, lined up her shot, and fired, neutralizing the enemy advance. Relief, adrenaline, and a newfound sense of empowerment surged through her. She was surviving, thriving, and influencing the course of events with every deliberate action. The tide was turning. Sarah's focus, skill, and collaboration with the SEAL were beginning to shape the battlefield. The attackers, though relentless, were facing a defense that was increasingly coordinated and lethal. Sarah had transformed fear into mastery, hesitation into decisive action. The rifle had become a tool of survival, a conduit of courage, and a symbol of her evolution from a routine task-oriented soldier to a decisive, empowered participant in a life-or-death struggle. The battlefield had transformed into a chaotic storm of dust, smoke, and blinding sunlight. Bullets whizzed past Sarah, ricocheting off concrete and metal, while explosions threw debris into the air. Her heartbeat was a constant drum in her ears, each pulse urging her to stay sharp, stay alive. Every instinct she had was on high alert, every decision a matter of life and death. She had come a long way from the nervous soldier who had started the morning cleaning rifles. Now she was a crucial part of the defense, a participant whose actions could determine the outcome. The SEAL moved like a shadow beside her, scanning the battlefield, his eyes cold and calculating. His presence was a lifeline, a steadying force in the chaos. Yet Sarah could feel that he was relying on her as much as she relied on him. She gripped the sniper rifle tightly, the weight no longer intimidating, but a tool of precision and power. Each shot she had taken had honed her confidence, and now she was prepared for the most critical moments of the attack. From her vantage point behind the barricade, Sarah observed a group of attackers attempting a coordinated push toward their position. Her fingers tightened around the rifle as she analyzed their movements. The SEAL's whisper cut through the chaos. "Hold. Watch the ridge. They'll move together. Be ready." Sarah exhaled slowly, raising the rifle to her shoulder. Her eyes scanned the terrain, following the subtle shifts of the enemy. In that moment, she felt a combination of fear and exhilaration. Fear of the unknown, exhilaration at the realization that she could act decisively to protect lives. The first attacker stepped out into the open, oblivious to her presence. Sarah's finger hovered over the trigger, her breathing controlled, her aim steady. She calculated distance, wind, and trajectory. She fired. The enemy faltered, giving the SEAL the opening to neutralize another threat. Relief surged through her, but she knew there was no time to celebrate. The battle was far from over, and each moment required unyielding focus. A second wave of enemies emerged, attempting to flank their position. Dust and smoke swirled around them, obscuring vision, but Sarah had learned to trust her instincts and training. She adjusted her scope, tracking movement with precision. The SEAL provided cover fire while signaling her to hold her line. Her hands were steady, her breathing deliberate, and her aim unwavering. She squeezed the trigger, the rifle bucking against her shoulder, and another attacker dropped behind cover. Victory was not guaranteed, but every shot was a small victory in the larger struggle. The intensity of the attack escalated. Explosions sent plumes of dirt into the air. Bullets ricocheted unpredictably, and the enemy seemed relentless. Yet, Sarah had found a rhythm. She moved deliberately between cover, scanning for movement, predicting attacks, and firing with precision. The rifle felt like an extension of her body, guiding her focus and courage. Fear was still present, but it had transformed into heightened awareness, sharpening every decision and every shot. The SEAL moved to intercept an enemy, attempting to breach the perimeter. Sarah adjusted her position, covering the ridge and monitoring the advancing group. She had become an integral part of the defense, coordinating her actions silently with the SEAL. Each decision carried weight. Each shot could change the course of the battle. She felt a strange mixture of fear, adrenaline, and empowerment, and acute awareness that her actions mattered in ways she had never experienced. A sudden movement caught her eye, a group of enemies attempting to take higher ground for a tactical advantage. Sarah's pulse surged, but clarity dominated panic. She raised the rifle, tracking their movements through the scope. The SEAL whispered, "Hold your fire until the lead moves. Then take the shot." She exhaled slowly, waited, and when the moment arrived, she fired. The lead enemy faltered, giving the SEAL the opportunity to neutralize the others. Sarah felt a rush of adrenaline, her confidence solidifying further. She was no longer merely reacting. She was anticipating, controlling, and influencing the battlefield. Time seemed to stretch as the intensity of combat peaked. The attackers were adapting, coordinating, and attempting new strategies. but Sarah had grown adept at predicting their movements. Her observations, training, and instincts guided her actions with remarkable precision. She adjusted her aim, taking careful shots that disrupted the enemy's plans and protected her comrades. Each successful action reinforced her confidence. Every shot validated her capability, and every second underscored the stakes of the battle. Basile moved alongside her, signaling for her to cover a new approach. Sarah repositioned herself, sliding between cover, adjusting the rifle, and scanning for threats. The enemy seemed almost inexhaustible, but their coordination was breaking under the relentless and precise fire from the SEAL team, now supported by Sarah's sharpshooting. She had become a force multiplier, her actions amplifying the effectiveness of their defense. Fear was present, but it was tempered by skill, focus, and determination. Suddenly, an enemy broke through a barricade and ran toward a vulnerable section of their perimeter. Sarah's mind raced. The SEAL's eyes locked onto hers, a silent command passing between them. Act. Her hands were steady, the rifle trained on the approaching enemy. She took a deliberate breath, exhaled, and squeezed the trigger. The attacker faltered and went down. Relief washed over her, but there was no time to relax. The battle was ongoing, unpredictable, and deadly. The attackers regrouped for one final push, their movements desperate and aggressive. Dust and smoke filled the air, making visibility difficult. Sarah adjusted her position, scanning for movement, tracking trajectories, and preparing for the decisive moments. She had learned to anticipate the enemy, to read patterns in their movements, and to act swiftly and decisively. The rifle had become an extension of her skill, focus, and courage, guiding her hands and decisions with precision. As the final wave approached, Sarah felt a strange calm descend over her. The fear that had gripped her earlier had transformed into resolute focus. Each shot she took was measured, calculated, and deliberate. She had become a participant in shaping the outcome, not a bystander. The SEAL moved beside her, covering angles and signaling threats. Together, they were an unstoppable duo, a synchronized force confronting chaos with precision and courage. The final clash was a whirlwind of motion, bullets, and explosions. Sarah moved fluidly between cover, tracking the enemy, predicting their movements, and firing with lethal accuracy. Each shot she fired disrupted the enemy's coordination, forcing them to retreat and regroup. Her confidence had grown immensely. The rifle was no longer a foreign tool, but a natural extension of her courage and skill. Fear existed only as a sharp focus, heightening her senses and guiding her actions. In the midst of chaos, she spotted the enemy leader coordinating the push from a distance. The SEAL signaled silently for her to take the shot. Sarah adjusted her scope, calculated distance, wind, and trajectory, and exhaled slowly. Her fingers squeezed the trigger. The shot hit its mark, the enemy leader faltering and disrupting the coordination of the remaining attackers. A surge of adrenaline and disbelief coursed through Sarah as she had made a decisive impact on the battle. With the leader down and morale faltering, the remaining attackers began to retreat. The battlefield shifted subtly, the chaos ebbing, and small tactical victories emerging. Sarah continued to fire as needed, covering the retreat, ensuring that her comrades remained safe. The rifle, once heavy and intimidating, felt like an instrument of empowerment, precision, and courage. She had risen from fear to mastery, from hesitation to decisive action. The SEAL moved beside her, nodding with approval. For the first time, Sarah allowed herself to breathe, to take in the scope of what had occurred. The attackers had been repelled, their coordination broken, and the tide of the battle had turned. Her heart still raced, but it was tempered by pride, relief, and an understanding of the magnitude of her role. She had acted decisively, faced fear, and influenced the outcome. The mundane morning of cleaning rifles had become a crucible that had forged courage, skill, and resilience. The battlefield, though scarred and chaotic, had shifted. The attackers were retreating, their aggression blunted by the precise and coordinated defense. Sarah lowered the rifle slightly, her hands trembling from adrenaline, but her focus remained sharp. She had survived the impossible, risen to the moment, and discovered strength she had never known. The SEAL's bold move to trust her with the sniper rifle had pushed her into a crucible of courage, and she had emerged capable, alert, and empowered. As dust settled and gunfire waned, Sarah realized the enormity of what had just occurred. She had not only survived, but had actively contributed to the defense, coordinating instinctively with the SEAL and influencing the tide of battle. Her hands, once trembling, were steady. Her mind, once consumed by fear, was clear and precise. The battlefield had tested her to the limits, but she had proven herself capable. For the first time, she felt a deep, unshakable sense of confidence, forged in the fire of combat and solidified by decisive action. The battlefield had finally quieted. The dust hung heavy in the air, coating everything in a thin gray layer. The acrid smell of gunpowder lingered, mixing with the metallic scent of spent shells. Sarah lowered the sniper rifle slowly, her hands shaking not from fear, but from the sheer intensity of the moments she had endured. Her body felt drained, muscles tense from hours of relentless motion, yet her mind was alive with clarity. She had survived, and in doing so, she had discovered strength she had never imagined. Around her, the SEAL team moved through the battlefield, checking on each other, clearing threats, and securing the area. Despite their training and experience, there was a quiet reverence in their movements, a respect for the intensity they had just faced. The SEAL who had handed Sarah the sniper rifle approached, his eyes scanning her face for any sign of distress. Instead, he found something else, a mixture of exhaustion, awe, and the unmistakable spark of accomplishment. "You did well," he said quietly, almost in disbelief. Sarah met his gaze, a faint smile forming on her lips, though her voice was still caught somewhere in her chest. She could hardly believe it herself. Hours ago, she had been cleaning the range, going through the motions of a routine task, unaware that her life would be tested in ways she could never have imagined. The rifle in her hands had felt foreign, heavy, and intimidating. Yet now, it was a symbol of her courage, her precision, and her ability to act decisively under pressure. Each shot she had fired, each movement she had made, had mattered. The realization washed over her like a tide, bringing with it a mixture of relief and empowerment. The SEAL clapped a hand on her shoulder, guiding her to a nearby cleared zone. "Come on, let's debrief and make sure everyone's accounted for." Sarah moved with him, her legs unsteady, but her mind sharp. Around them, other soldiers were tending to minor injuries, checking equipment, and communicating via radio to coordinate final security measures. The chaos that had defined the morning was slowly being replaced by order, structure, and the sobering aftermath of battle. As she walked, Sarah replayed the events in her mind. The sudden attack, the adrenaline, the weight of the sniper rifle in her hands. It all seemed almost surreal. She remembered the fear that had gripped her initially, the trembling of her hands, and the uncertainty of her first shot. But she also remembered the SEAL's calm presence, the trust he had placed in her, and the way that trust had propelled her into action. It was a lesson she would carry forever. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. The debrief was methodical. Each soldier recounted their experience, highlighting successes, challenges, and areas for improvement. Sarah listened intently, realizing that every detail mattered, not only for understanding the events of the battle, but also for learning and growth. When it was her turn, She described her actions, the shots she had taken, the threats she had observed, and how she had coordinated with the SEAL. Her voice was calm, measured, but there was an undeniable pride beneath her words. She had been tested and had risen to the occasion. Her peers listened with a mixture of surprise and respect. It was unusual for someone with minimal combat experience to take such decisive action under fire. The SEAL's initial decision to hand her the sniper rifle had seemed bold, even reckless, but it had proven transformative. Sarah's observations, rapid assessments, and precise actions had contributed significantly to repelling the attack. The realization settled in her chest. She had not only survived, but had made a difference. Her contribution mattered in a tangible, undeniable way. After the debrief, Sarah and the SEAL walked to a quieter area of the range. The chaos of the battle had receded, replaced by the soft hum of distant radio chatter and the occasional clatter of equipment being packed up. He looked at her thoughtfully. "You were exceptional," he said. "Not everyone can step into that kind of pressure and perform. You didn't just survive, you excelled." Sarah nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. She had doubted herself at the beginning of the day, unsure of her ability to act decisively. Now she understood the depth of her resilience, the strength of her focus, and the power of trust. She thought about the rifle in her hands, the instrument of both fear and empowerment. It had been the conduit for her courage, a tool that transformed routine skill into extraordinary action. She realized that the skills she had once considered mundane careful handling of equipment, attention to detail, discipline had prepared her for this extraordinary crucible. Each small habit had become a lifeline, each lesson from training now fully realized in the chaos of real combat. The experience had revealed her potential in ways she had never anticipated. Sarah sat quietly for a moment, letting the exhaustion and adrenaline wash over her. She thought about the other soldiers, the SEAL team, and the unity required to survive and succeed in such a brutal environment. Every life mattered, every action counted, and every decision could tip the balance. The gravity of that responsibility, coupled with the intensity of her own experience, left her both humbled and empowered. She understood the weight of courage, the power of trust, and the reality of facing fear head-on. As the sun began to lower, casting long shadows across the range, Sarah took a deep breath and looked around. The attackers had been repelled, their coordinated push broken, their morale shattered. The battlefield bore the scars of the engagement's scattered debris, smoke, and the tangible tension of what had just occurred, but it also bore witness to the effectiveness of focus, precision, and courage under fire. Sarah felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had been tested, and she had risen to the challenge. The SEAL joined her side, his presence calm and reassuring. "You've changed today," he said simply. "You've faced chaos, acted decisively, and learned what you're capable of. That's something few ever experience." Sarah nodded, absorbing his words. It was true, she felt transformed. The fear that had once dominated her, every thought had been tempered by experience, clarity, and courage. She had discovered strength within herself, a resilience she hadn't known existed, and the capacity to act decisively in moments of extreme pressure. They walked back toward the command post, the sounds of activity softening as soldiers packed up and accounted for equipment. Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from routine rifle cleaning to facing a sudden, intense attack. The contrast was stark, but the lessons were undeniable. Fear could be harnessed, trust could empower, and focus could transform chaos into controlled action. She had been an ordinary soldier, performing ordinary tasks, and yet the extraordinary circumstances had revealed her extraordinary potential. As they reached the command post, Sarah looked once more at the rifle she had wielded in battle. It was no longer merely a weapon. It was a symbol of courage, responsibility, and the growth that comes from stepping beyond fear. She understood that her journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more tests, but she had proven to herself that she could rise to the occasion. She had been thrust into the crucible of combat and emerged not only unbroken but empowered, confident, and aware of her own resilience. The SEAL gave her a final nod before moving on to coordinate with other team members. Sarah watched him go, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. His trust, his calm presence, and his decision to hand her the rifle had been the catalyst for her transformation. She had been scared, uncertain, and hesitant, yet she had acted decisively and effectively. The experience had reshaped her understanding of courage, skill, and responsibility. She had discovered strength in herself that she had never known, and the lessons of this day would stay with her forever. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the battlefield in long shadows and soft golden light, Sarah allowed herself a moment to breathe fully. The battle was over. The attackers had been repelled. She had survived. She had acted decisively, with precision and courage. And most importantly, she had discovered that true bravery was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act in spite of it. The lessons of this day, the weight of trust, the power of focus, and the strength of resilience would remain with her, guiding her through whatever challenges lay ahead. The range was quiet now, the chaos replaced by reflection, relief, and the quiet hum of survival. Sarah knew she would never forget the moments of fear, adrenaline, and determination that had defined this battle. She had been ordinary at sunrise, cleaning rifles and performing routine tasks. By sunset, she had become someone capable of extraordinary action under the most extreme circumstances. She had faced fear, embraced responsibility, and emerged stronger, more confident, and undeniably transformed.